This encounter would have happened a little over 10 years ago. I would have been 26 to 27 male at the time, but I cannot 100% remember what year this was now, but it was sometime from 2011 to 2013. At the time, I was frequently going out with friends to bars and parties and hanging out until pretty late most weekends. The friend's house that I usually hung out at was on a side street just off a main road where a lot of popular and crowded bars and restaurants were. You had to park on the street at his house, and during the weekend when it was busy, it was pretty common to have to park a number of blocks away. The street closer to the bars was pretty nice, but if you went a few blocks in the opposite direction, it got a little sketchier at night. After a night of hanging out, I had to walk back to my car pretty late, which was parked a number of blocks away towards the slightly sketchier area. This was during the winter, so I was wearing some kind of heavy sweater or pullover and a beanie knit hat. This detail is only important as you couldn't really gather much idea about what I looked like from a distance in the dark, aside from my general height and build. There wasn't much through traffic as you got further away from the bars, and the roads were pretty dark without any streetlights. As I was walking down the sidewalk, a car slowly started creeping down the street, matching my pace as it pulled up beside me and then stopped. The window of the car rolled down, and driving the car was an attractive young woman who said that I looked cold and that I should let her give me a ride to where I was going. She seemed very friendly. I indicated that I wasn't parked far away and appreciated the offer, but was going to just keep walking. She then tried really hard to convince me to get in the car with her, since it was so cold. No small talk to establish any information about me to make sure I wasn't a weirdo, just asking me to get in the car pretty aggressively. Based off what I was wearing and how dark it was, there was no way she could have had much idea about what I actually looked like to possibly find me attractive. And even if she did, I don't know many women who would pick up a male stranger after midnight when they're alone in their car. There were about 10 bars nearby she could have gone to if she just wanted to pick up a guy. There was no reason I could think of that she would have to resort to driving around, offering to pick up strangers. She continued to drive alongside me and offered me a ride again, which I declined and kept going. I picked up my pace, and she eventually drove off. As soon as she was a few blocks away, I quickly got in my car and made sure there was nobody lurking around or close by. The whole scenario felt off, and it didn't make sense to me. I asked my friends about it later, and all of the women agreed that they wouldn't offer a random guy a ride at nighttime in that kind of scenario, even if the guy looked like Ryan Gosling or Channing Tatum. My suspicion is that there was someone laid down in the backseat of the car, out of view, with a weapon, waiting to rob anyone who accepted the ride. I couldn't really figure out any reason she would be offering rides like that to complete strangers in the middle of the night, as it would be very unsafe for her to just pick up random strangers. I just assumed that there had to be something nefarious going on in that car, and I do wonder what would have happened if anyone just hopped in the car with her. This happened 18 years ago, before I had access to cell phone and internet. When I was 15, I'd walked from a hospital alone to a bus stop. I knew I had at least 15 minutes to wait and didn't look forward to it, when a man in his mid-30s started walking beside me. He was uncomfortably close, but I was young, and thanks to my upbringing, avoided conflict with adults like the plague, so I decided not to offend him and just bear with it, telling myself he's just walking in the same direction. And he was, but not to take the bus, as I had soon found out. Once at the bus stop, where we were all alone, the guy started talking to me, opening with questions about the bus schedule, which was on display behind him. I stayed rather passive in the conversation, only giving polite nods and a yes or no where it was expected. And he probably liked it, because he perked up and entered an almost manic-like state of happiness, talking about his life and job and everything. Gradually, he started talking about how he's unable to find a girlfriend and how he's watching his neighbors who slighted him and writing everything down to get them later. He had a good chuckle on that. The alarm went off in my head at that. I was very much used to my peers complaining about not being able to find a girlfriend, so I didn't think much about the incel stuff. The bus was now approaching, and it became clear I was going to board it, and he was not. He snatched my ticket before I got my wits about me, and I thought he was going to destroy it to prevent me from boarding, but no. He wrote his phone number on it and gave it back with an attitude of benevolent generosity. I boarded the bus and thought I had seen the last of him, but no. Weeks later, he boarded the same bus as me. He immediately approached me and casually asked me whether I was going to school. Having my backpack on me and not being used to lying, I said I am. He asked me,
"Are you going to university?"
I gave him an awkward look and said, "I'm 15. He seemed surprised, but not about my age. He thought he gave me a compliment because apparently being older is what every high school is craving. I got off the bus on the next stop because that's where my school was. He didn't follow me, and another passenger who overheard our conversation told me, "You shouldn't be talking to men like this." I didn't know what he meant, and he certainly was the same age as that one, so I just mumbled something, and off I went. A week later, the creep stood in front of my school, waiting for me, all dressed up. I had seen him before I walked out of the door, and a chill went down my spine. I didn't know what to do, so I fetched the school director, and I told him about my encounter. He went out and dealt with the man, and thankfully, he must have gotten the message, because I never met him again. Only years later, I understood he may have stalked me ever since the walk to the bus, probably checked the schedule and wrote it for weeks to get another chance encounter, and then deducted where my school was. Most likely, he wanted to manipulate a child into a relationship, since he wasn't able to initiate one with an adult woman, and was convinced he was going to be successful. I work overnight at a store. I'm a stalker, 25 female. When I first started, a guy around my age got hired a couple months after me. He started hanging around another coworker and I on break, and we eventually became friends, even hanging out alone on break sometimes. He seemed pretty normal at first, agreeable, and a good conversationalist. He told me he was autistic, which I think helped me make excuses for him a bit in hindsight. I was in a bad place mentally at the time, and having someone validate me felt nice at first. But then he started getting touchy. I would eventually be telling him more personal stuff, and he would start to rub my back. I didn't want to be rude at first, so I didn't say anything, but then he did it more often. I told him to stop, and he seemed to be sorry, until doing it again, eventually. I was alone with him all these incidences, and the look on his face when he did, eventually, showed predatory vibes, and not like the friend I thought I had. Around the time he started doing this, he also confessed to me something he did in the past to a friend of his. You can probably guess what it's along the lines of. He acted quite remorseful and said him and the friend are civil now, and that it was a long time ago. I think he also cried a bit. I'm generally a compassionate person who believes in second chances, so while this is when more red flags started going off, I still hung out with him a bit, although more distantly. It didn't help that his general demeanor is, one of a pitiful person. Nice act. He hung out with my boyfriend and I a couple of times. He lives near us, so we were kind of excited to have someone to hang out with at first, but he just keeps getting weirder and weirder the few times we hung out. He always seemed to be trying to subtly one-up my boyfriend in a sarcastic manner. There was also a strange time when he did a deep belly laugh at an explicit sexual song playing on his car radio that my boyfriend and I just felt kind of uncomfortable about. He'd make a point to not drink that much around us when we were drinking, despite bragging about how much he could down. He rubbed my back yet again at one point while I was drunk, when my boyfriend left the room, trying to pass it off as comforting. He He generally tried to be flirtatious whenever my boyfriend left the room. Eventually, enough was enough, and I cut him off, although I still have to work with him. This was last summer. We weren't even friends for that long. Since then, he has come in early every night to put out my work stuff for me. Leaves me food and water and gifts, stuff that I've mentioned in conversations before. Parks near me and waits for me to leave the parking lot so we can drive together, I guess. One time he waited a half hour as I was chatting with another coworker. He waits in front of his house for me to pass by him to get home. I have to turn onto his road to get to my road. He still says weird phrases my boyfriend and I used. Texts, despite being ignored. Left a note saying,
"You really do hate me."
on my work cart after months of ignoring him. He's written my full initials, which he remembers somehow, on a work cart in marker and leaves the same one out for me every day. I always try to erase them, even wrote "stop" on it once, but the next day I'll see he wrote them again. Oh, and whenever he walks by me, he looks sad or pissy. Managers have talked to him, and a report is going through HR right now, but I just hope he doesn't escalate. Despite being talked to, he still leaves the cart and stuff out for me with some water and rewrites my initials. Update: nothing's really seemed to happen with HR so far, except for him no longer waiting for me in the parking lot. I guess the manager talked with him about that. I told him to stop leaving work cards out for me, and he acted like I was being unreasonable. Then he wrote my initials on my work cart while I wasn't looking, as well as a smiley face, which it seemed he also drew on every window of my car the other day. He's fucking obsessed.